Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We are embarking on a genuinely fascinating journey today into the very architecture of human behavior. We're looking specifically at the invisible structures that shape our societies, our decisions, and, well, how we interact with one another on a daily basis. Anthropologists have literally never found a single human society, past or present, completely devoid of some kind of shared moral or religious framework. It's a universal human constant, from ancient hunter-gatherer tribes all the way to sprawling modern metropolises. Whether you're deeply religious, strictly secular, or anywhere in between, you operate within frameworks of faith and morality. But how often do we actually stop to analyze what these frameworks are doing to us? Today, we're going to unpack the mechanics of belief. We're looking directly at the source material to understand how the exact same systems that elevate humanity can, ironically, also hold it back.
Religion binds and blinds, morality binds and blinds. Just let that sit for a second. This isn't just some catchy phrase, it's really the fundamental paradox of our entire social existence. We're looking at a double-edged sword that's been swinging since the absolute dawn of human civilization. These frameworks do two things simultaneously. They pull us tightly together, and they restrict our field of vision. So this explainer is going to explore exactly how this dual mechanism works, completely impartially based straight on our source text.
All right, moving into section 1, the dual nature.
So both religion and morality share this profound, totally undeniable duality. The main idea here is that these systems are essentially survival mechanisms for communities, right? That create a deep, necessary sense of belonging. But, and this is the critical catch, you can't have the boundary that defines an us without inherently creating a them. Let's start with the first half of that equation, binding. Binding is all about bringing together a group of people who live with common principles, rules, ethics, and morals, all working toward common goals. Think back to early human history for a second. Our ancestors didn't have sharp claws or thick hides. Our absolute biggest evolutionary advantage was cooperation. Shared morals allowed early human tribes to actually trust each other, to share resources during brutal winters, and to basically survive as a unified collective. It's the ultimate social glue. Religion and morality provide the shared vocabulary that lets a group coordinate and flourish. It's kind of like the warmth of a campfire that draws everyone into a circle, creating one unified whole out of a bunch of disparate individuals.
Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is how we pivot to the flip side, blinding. The exact same unifying systems that create that warm campfire circle, they also create the pitch-black darkness outside of it. Blinding is the tendency for these shared belief systems to lead to rigidity, intolerance, and just a really narrow-minded worldview. The source material highlights this psychological phenomenon where group norms, which were totally established for protection originally, eventually calcify. For instance, a societal rule might originate to protect a community from historical dangers, or maybe to maintain order during a famine. But centuries later, the original context is totally lost, and the rule transforms into this rigid metric for judging who is pure and who is an outcast. When the rules of the group become so absolute that they literally cannot be questioned, the group becomes blind to outside perspectives, alternative truths, and sometimes even basic human empathy for anyone outside their little circle. The foundation basically turns into a fortress.
Which brings us to section 2, the power of binding.
Now, it's incredibly important to state impartially here that the blinding effect we just talked about is absolutely not an inevitable rule. It's a risk, for sure, but not a guarantee. When functioning healthily, the binding effect of these systems generates just immense societal value. And these aren't abstract concepts. They are the tangible, real-world outputs of healthy moral and religious binding. First up, they inspire acts of compassion. Think about the massive networks of hospitals, orphanages, and disaster relief charities founded by faith-based and ethical organizations all over the globe. Second, they drive justice. Major social transformations, like the civil rights movement, leaned super heavily on shared moral and religious language to push society to correct its inequalities. It gave communities a clear standard to point to when demanding fairness. And third, they encourage selflessness. They ask the individual to put the needs of the collective way above their own ego, prompting people to volunteer, to donate, and to care for neighbors they don't even know. These moral frameworks have historically inspired some of the absolute greatest achievements in human society.
So, what does this actually mean for you, the viewer? Well, it means these structures provide a framework for ethical behavior, meaning and purpose in everyday life. Because let's face it, we all need a compass. We need a way to navigate the chaotic, often overwhelming nature of existence. Religion and morality, at their very best, hand us that compass. They tell us not just how to act, but why our actions matter.
embedding our daily, totally mundane choices with profound significance and direction.
Okay, let's flip the coin. Section 3. The danger of blinding. We've got to be pretty analytical and cautious here, because ignoring the pitfalls of dogma is exactly how that blinding effect takes root. If we're going to acknowledge the immense power these systems have to shape human behavior, we have to also acknowledge how catastrophic they can be when that power calcifies into absolute, unquestionable certainty. The danger usually manifests quietly by limiting our thinking and fostering prejudice. A community establishes a moral rule for a really good reason, usually to protect the group. But over time, the reason is forgotten and only the strict rule remains. At that point, the framework stops being a tool for understanding the world and just becomes a filter that blocks out reality. The source material examines how even super well-intentioned moral frameworks turn into vehicles for prejudice. Like when deep loyalty to a specific community morphs into systemic discrimination against immigrants or outsiders. The in-group love inevitably twists into out-group hostility if we allow these frameworks to dictate our worldview without leaving any room for nuance, growth, or the lived experiences of other people. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate tension we're dealing with. The exact same psychological mechanisms that create sources of great good, like compassion, justice, and meaning, can result in devastating pitfalls, like a rigid worldview, intolerance, and prejudice. This is the visual weight of our whole dialectic today. The psychological structure that builds a hospital is the exact same structure that can start an inquisition. So the question isn't really whether we should have belief systems, we're literally wired for them, but rather, how do we manage them? Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, striking the balance. So, if belief systems inherently bind and blind, how on earth do we get the benefits of the binding without suffering the darkness of the blinding? Well, the synthesis of our explainer today, according to the source material, lies entirely in the realm of conscious interpretation. We actually hold the key. So, the crucial point is this. The key lies in how we interpret and apply these concepts. Religion and morality are not static objects sitting on a shelf. They are living, breathing tools. Their power depends entirely on our active, individual application of them. If you passively accept a framework, you risk being blinded by it. But if you actively engage with it, interpret it, and consciously decide how to apply it to the wildly complex modern world around you, you fundamentally change the nature of the framework itself. When we actually do the hard work of interpretation, we transform these systems. A foundation for empathy, understanding, and critical thinking creates a powerful force for positive change. Notice that critical thinking is listed right there alongside empathy and understanding. They are not opposites at all. Now, let's be totally honest. Actively combining your belief with critical thinking, that is exhausting work. It is so much easier to just let someone else do the thinking for you and coast on autopilot. But doing that heavy lifting doesn't weaken your morality. It strengthens it. It transforms potential rigidity into a vibrant, flexible catalyst that can actually improve society, rather than just forcing it to conform. Ultimately, it's up to each individual to strike a balance between adherence to beliefs and critical thinking. This means you. It means me. We really cannot outsource our morality to an institution, a text, or a tradition. Those things can absolutely guide us. They can bind us in really beautiful ways. But the final responsibility for evaluating your ethical framework rests entirely on your shoulders. You have to constantly police the borders of your own beliefs to ensure they aren't turning into brick walls. Let's move to these steps and see how this builds a really clear, actionable roadmap to avoid the trap of blind faith and rigid morality. Step 1. Question assumptions. Don't just accept the way things are. Actually ask why a certain rule exists and whether it still serves a compassionate purpose today. Step 2. Challenge biases. You've got to recognize that your worldview is inherently limited by your own personal experience. It requires daily effort to actively push against your own learned prejudices and blind spots. And step 3, seek diverse perspectives. Intentionally look at the world through the eyes of someone totally outside your binding circle. Talk to people who completely disagree with you, not to argue with them, but to genuinely understand where they're coming from. This kind of active engagement is exactly how you keep your belief system healthy. Which leaves us with one final, absolutely vital question to ask ourselves. Are your beliefs building a foundation for empathy or a wall of prejudice? Because as we've learned today, the architecture of faith and morality has the power to do either. The tools are right there in your hands, and the blueprint is yours to draw. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.